Ernie, I'm sorry.
This
Yep.
meeting is being recorded.
Hang on. I'm trying to let people in the meeting at the same time as I'm setting up recording. There we go. All right. So Ernie, thank you so much for joining us. And I turn it over to you, my friend.
Oh, yeah, he's muted.
Ernie's
Ernie,
muted.
Here we go.
There
Sorry.
you go. That's okay.
How do you explain when things don't go as you assume they would? So it's the morning of January 30th, 1968.
Oh,
North Vietnamese armies have launched a surprise attack against the American forces in Vietnam. This was Tet, which is the Lunar New Year, and there was a tradition in Vietnam that had lasted decades, that there was never any fighting during Tet. But that particular year, the North Vietnamese generals had decided they saw an opportunity, and they decided to break with tradition with the hope that they would overwhelm American forces and bring about a swift end to the war. This was later known as the Tet Offensive. Some of you are old enough to remember that, like I do. Anyway, the Vietnamese threw 85,000 troops at over 125 targets across South Vietnam. And they did catch the Americans completely by surprise. Many of the American commanders weren't even at their posts because they were in nearby local towns or villages celebrating Tet with the locals. But here's the really amazing thing. The US military repelled every single attack, every single one. Most of the major fighting had ceased about a week later, and the United States had lost fewer than 1,000 troops. Now that's not a small number, but the North Vietnamese had lost 35,000 of their 85,000 troops. In the course of years in Vietnam, America lost about 58,000 men. North Vietnam lost over 3 million people. Now that's by a percentage of the population that would have been the equivalent of losing 27 million Americans in 1968. If you look at the Vietnam War, America won nearly every single major battle it fought. So it kind of raises the question, doesn't it? How do you win all the battles, decimate your enemy, and still lose the war? Now you have to admit, there has to be something about this concept of winning and losing that we don't understand. And it's not simply the score that we keep. There's something more to it. So how do you explain when things don't go as you assumed? For example, why is Apple so innovative? They're just a computer company, right? They're just like everyone else, but why is it that they always seem to have something different? Another example, why is it that Martin Luther King was able to lead the civil rights movement? There was no Twitter or Instagram back then. Why is it that the Wright brothers were able to figure out controlled, powered, manned flight when there were other teams working on the same thing at the same time with much more money and that were much more qualified? The Wright brothers, after all, they ran a bicycle shop. So you have to be able to explain why others are able to achieve things that seem to defy all the assumptions. So let's talk about business. How do you explain when all the money invested in these topics, sales training, management training, marketing, advertising, social media, equality now, product management, customer service, and yet all the money that's spent, and in a lot of companies, you don't see much improvement in things like customer loyalty, today employee retention, or even revenue. So there has to be something else going on, don't you think? Now, there's a pretty simple formula for success that I learned from a book called Spin Selling. They call it the KFC formula. It's got nothing to do with chicken, but it's easy to remember. Know what you want, figure out what you're getting, and change what you're doing until you get what you want. It seems simple, right? But of course, there are other things at work even there. You have to get people to agree to change something. And then even because you can get someone to agree to a change, you still have to have everyone on the same page with the same goal in mind. Well, anyway, that's another webinar, but let's talk about what needs to change and what you need to change it to. Now, Einstein is often misquoted and has been attributed with this saying, which I can't find anything that says that Einstein actually said this. We can't solve our problems with the same thinking we use to create them. He probably said something more like this: the world we have made as a result of the level of thinking we have done thus far creates problems we cannot solve at the same level as the level we created them at. Now, there's a lot of people that quote this kind of thing from back in the 1970s. Before that, I don't find much. And so Einstein was running around in the 50s and 60s. So I don't think he said it. So what do we do to solve problems? Well, have you ever thought about looking outside your own industry for answers? I certainly have in the industry that I'm in, which is healthcare. I came across this book. In 1986, there was a theologian of all things named James Carsey, who wrote this wonderful little book called Finite and Infinite Games. And in it, he defined two types of games. So if you have at least one competitor, you have a game. And there are two types of games, finite and infinite games. So you start to wonder, well, wait a minute. What is this about? It's from game theory. And I started to think about it in my industry, and you can think about it in your industry. What might it be able to teach you about these topics? These are things that CEOs and leaders everywhere worry about in business. How do you attract and retain talent, right? Disruptions that are brought about by new business models or technology. How do you adapt to hybrid work? What about all the geopolitical uncertainty going on? If you have a company that, is international, that's a concern. Cybersecurity is a big concern. Slowing growth, I mean, certainly that's been a problem lately. And dealing with the effects of the pandemic. All those are things that we might be able to learn something about through game theory. So first thing we should do is talk about these two types of games. All right. What's the difference between a finite and an infinite game, which is what Carsey was talking about? Well, game theory says there's only two kinds of games, finite and infinite. Finite game is pretty easy to think of. Think of baseball or football or chess. You've got a beginning, a middle, and an end. You've got a known number of players. You've got fixed rules that everybody agrees upon. And you've got an agreed upon outcome. You don't get to the end of the baseball game after 9 innings and somebody can't say, oh, wait, if we could just play another 3 innings, I know I could catch it. No, that's not how the game is played, okay? Infinite games are quite different. There are known and unknown players. You may not even know everybody who's in the game. There are changeable rules because everybody pretty much makes up their own rules. And then you have the objective, which is not to win, but to perpetuate the game, to keep playing. Think of, can you declare yourself the winner of the game of marriage? If you want to claim yourself the winner of marriage, ask your spouse. I bet they have a different answer. So also with friendship, same kind of thing. You can't be the winner of the game of friendship. It's an infinite game. All businesses are infinite games, okay? Now, there are certainly finite games within infinite games, and you can win those, absolutely, but still, you can never win the infinite game. Last thing I want to point out there is you don't get to choose what kind of game you're playing. You can only choose to play or not to play. And so for an infinite game, you can't decide, oh, well, I don't want to play that because it's not finite. I can't win. Well, that means you're not going to play. You can't. So let's look what happens, though, when you try to play an infinite game with the wrong rules. All business is an infinite game. There are many players. You don't even always know who all the players are. There are no fixed rules other than acting legally. And even then, those aren't always obeyed. And there's an infinite number of ways to conduct business. Everybody on here probably uses a different model for how you conduct business. There's also no agreed upon objective. One person's definition of success may not be yours. What makes you the winner? I don't agree with your metrics. I don't agree that you are the winner. So how can you declare yourself to be the winner? And there's no end. I don't care who you are. If you leave the game goes on. That's what an infinite game is like. So you got to play by the right rules for the game that you're in. Now, if you're playing a finite game, as long as you have a finite player playing versus another finite player where the game is stable. And by stable, I mean everyone is secure in what's happening, how things will play out, how and who will be the winner. That's a stable game as a finite game. And I think somebody asked me the other day, I think that's the Atlanta Braves home field. Anyway, that's baseball. It's a finite game. What about an infinite game? As long as you have an infinite player playing against another infinite player, well, the game is stable. And again, I say stable because everybody knows there's no end of the game. There's no winner, only that somebody may be winning or ahead of other people for a while, but that's not the end of the story, okay? A comment I get a lot of times from people when I do this talk is, well, Ernie, I don't want to play in a game I can't win. Well, in an infinite game, that's exactly what the other players want you to say, because they don't want you to play. They want you to drop out so you can be winning more often. And that's what happens, okay? So what if you don't play by the right rules for the game that you're in? Well, if you're in an infinite game and you have an infinite player playing against a finite player, the game is unstable. Do I really need to remind you about Vietnam or even Afghanistan or even now what's going on in Ukraine? I think that's an infinite game. I don't think Russia will be able to win, but that's my opinion. Anyway, it's an infinite game. You have to play it by a different set of rules. Now, why is the game unstable in that kind of an instance? Because a finite player playing by finite rules in an infinite game produces nothing but chaos. They will be racing through their resources and their will to play the game. Now, in the business world, we call that bankruptcy or a merger or an acquisition. That's what happens. The problem with those things is you create a decline of trust among not just your employees, but certainly your employees. Also a decline of cooperation and a decline of innovation. You're playing a finite mindset, playing in an infinite game. You find yourselves in a quagmire, a continuous game of whack-a-mole. You're all familiar with mass layoffs, right? That's a finite mindset playing in an infinite game. Don't even get me started talking about, why there were never mass layoffs in America before the 1980s. That all started in the 80s thanks to a guy named Milton Friedman. Don't get me started. Okay, anyway, here's an example of playing with the wrong rules in mind. Remember we mentioned global politics. Well, if you're old enough, you remember the Cold War between the USA and the USSR. What were the games that were going on? Well, there was our nuclear weapons versus their nuclear weapons. Who was winning there? Who was winning in ideology? Democracy versus Soviet-style communism, economics. Khrushchev was saying he was going to bury us. How well did that work? But anyway, the problem is there are a lot of people who think and act like and talk like the USA won the Cold War. Really? What about the new Cold War that is showing up now? What about that? How is that affecting the world? And what kind of things are going on in that game. Oh, and by the way, there are three things that we honor above all else and fight for in the United States, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Funny how that works. All right, so let's look. Did the USA really win? Which game is not still in play? Which infinite game? Nuclear weapons? Well, now there's a lot more than two countries that have nuclear weapons. So that's a game. Ideology, Islamic extremism versus white nationalist extremism. Economics, we're fighting China on that. And, you know, but again, is the USA still winning based upon whose metrics? And can you get other people to agree that those are the metrics to determine who is winning or not? So I think you'll agree with me that we're still in this infinite game. This is from an article that was written by Deming, who, if I understand correctly, was one of the founders of ASQ. So look at these problems. In particular, the first one, which I've got highlighted. Lack of consistency of purpose to plan product and service that will have a market and keep the company in business and provide jobs. These first 5 rules certainly describe, you know, a different kind of thinking. But I think they actually, for the most part, define finite thinking. I read somewhere recently that the average lifetime of a company before the 1970s was about 60 years. Now it's more like 15 years. Guess why that is? I've been doing this talk long enough to know that some people don't like the idea that they're playing a game they can't win. Well, so here are your choices if you don't like playing that kind of game. You only have 2 choices. Either play by the rules or drop out. Because if you don't play by the right rules, you will probably fail and lose. And in fact, I think you will, in fact, fail and lose eventually, if not sooner rather than later. Okay, so what's your reaction to this kind of thing so far? Well, here's a Harvard Business Review article that identified 4 types of manager styles. And I think some of these include infinite game thinking versus finite game thinking. And you're probably on this chart somewhere. Well, I say probably. If you're a manager of any kind, you're on this chart somewhere. I would like to think that even by listening to me for just an hour today, you might move a little closer to that number 4. But I'm also not foolish enough to think that it's going to move you very far. But anyway, I'm hoping you will be somewhere in the area of 4 and that you have in mind to make a difference in the world. And if you want to do that, you need to be near that number 4. Now, every business is an infinite game. I hope I've convinced you of that or that you understood it before. Well, so is your department. I don't care what it is. Question is, how's it played? How's it played by a business, by a department, or by you? Yes, you can learn to play the infinite game. Now, I want to make this clear. It's the same reason I gave these kind of talks for free. I always do this kind of a talk for free, because if you don't change your mindset to be an infinite game player, frankly, you don't stand a chance. As I've already said, I think you will fail, either now or later, but at some point you will, because there are infinite game players out there that will be able to stay in the game beyond you. Okay, so there are some rules about how to play the infinite game. Now, I learned a lot of this from a guy by the name of Simon Sinek. Actually, I don't know if he pronounces it Sinek or Sinek. You can look him up on the internet, on YouTube. Maybe you've heard of him. He's got a book. I'm going to talk about that a little later and show you a link to it, called The Infinite Game. And he's also got a book called Start With Why. I'm going to show you that in just a moment. I have boiled down some of that book to be these 5 rules. This is what I teach in the healthcare industry to hospitals. You want to build, and this is a beautiful quote. I've always loved it. And this first rule is, in my opinion, the most important and the one that's perhaps the hardest one to play by, but it works. It works very well. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up people together, collect wood, and assign them tasks and work to build a ship. Rather, teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea. How do you do that? It's not the easiest thing to do, but it can be done. Rule number one for playing an infinite game: you're going to need to advance a just cause. It's to play, you must promote some kind of a big picture vision that provides a framework for all your corporate strategies. This is what it does for you. It inspires people to work hard and make sacrifices because they believe in the cause. This is what I do with my company. That's why I have people who normally get paid $300 to $1,500 to do a talk, and they do talks for me for free because we have a just cause. You can find a just cause, and it has 5 different elements that are spelled out here by Simon Sinek in his book, Start With Why, which is still today a bestseller over on Amazon, and you can find it easily. He also has talks on YouTube that are easy for you to find him again, and he came up with something that he called the golden circle. I do believe this is original with him. Basically, it was that he said there are, most companies know what they do. That's on that outer circle. Okay, great. You sell products or services, something like that. Some of the organizations actually know how they do it. Well, at least some of the people inside the organization certainly know how they do it, and that makes them a little bit special, sets them apart from their competition, right? That's called differentiation. Not many organizations know why they do what they do because they've never chosen a just cause. Now, if you think about Apple, I mentioned them already. You can agree with me or not. Their why is they want to upset the status quo. That's been Steve Jobs' goal from the very beginning when he started Apple. And that's why people are inspired to work with them. Simon Sinek talks about first why and then trust. You can build why, and then that will help people to trust what you're doing. Sinek has a vision for the world. I have a vision for my industry, and you can ask me about that later if you want, and I'll go through that. Let's talk about the next rule. This is about the decisions that you will be making as an infinite player. However, this rule actually has some gray area in it. You'll see what I mean. To play the infinite game, you need to make decisions based upon your values, not simply your interests. What are your values? Your values have to take precedence over what you do. Now, sometimes you're going to find that you have to pay attention to an interest over your values, but that's not typical. You're trying to inspire trust and cooperation and innovation in your people, in your clients, in your vendors, all of that. So your values are going to be important, especially if you publish them. But think about it. Think about values. What are our values as Americans, right? We don't leave wounded enemy soldiers on the field to die. We bring them in our own field hospitals. That's dangerous for us. It doesn't go with our interests. It goes against our interests. But our value is we're not going to just leave them out there to die. What about torturing terrorists or supposed terrorists? Now, whether you agree with that or not, the question is, why didn't we do that if we were going to do it? Why didn't we do it in Nebraska? Why did we do it offshore? Because it was somehow easier for Americans to stomach it offshore, at least some Americans. So that's, again, it's about values versus interests. Why are values important? Because that is how you're going to make decisions. Do you have a set of guiding principles for making decisions? Do you have values? Are they useful Are they real? Can anyone in your company use those to make a decision about a difficult course of action that they're going to need to do? Does it give you the right criteria so that you can choose an appropriate course of action for the decision that you have to make? How does your company see their core values? Core values I see from a lot of companies, and you've probably seen the same thing. Their core values are generally about growth. Okay. Now, does that value, is that useful? Does it build trust and cooperation and innovation with people? I don't think it would do as much for me as some kind of values that would be more useful, that could be used as a tool to make decisions. That's how an infinite game player will be thinking. Your company may have a list of values. Have you even seen them? Are they posted anywhere? Are they on a wall? Are they on the website? An infinite player's list of values might include things like this. Look at those values. Those are things you can use to make decisions. Okay. So those are the kind of things that you want to look for and you want to have if you want to play the infinite game and be winning and not, remember, you want to inspire trust, cooperation, and innovation. That is what you're trying to do. Rule number 3. This next rule requires a real change in thinking, and I think it gets a lot of lip service in some places, but it's about having a slightly different focus than you might be used to. The rule is you are your only competitor. Does that mean you don't need to think about your rivals? No, but you need to think about how you can be continuously improving. Be your own superhero. Continuous learning is required for that. Continuous improvement is the game. Now, here's a big question for you, though. How do you look at errors in your company? Rejects out of your production line, returns from your customers, refunds to your customers. How do you look at those? You look at those as big mistakes, somebody's head needs to be rolled, or do you just look at them as something that, well, it certainly needs to be corrected? We need to get the bottom of it and correct it. Do you see them as opportunities to get better? Because that's what every one of those represents. If you're an infinite game player, you will use them for continuous learning, not for blaming other people or for getting rid of people and getting somebody better. You will look at it as an opportunity to make yourself and your company better. Look at this. Here's a perfect example of an infinite game mindset. You may like Elon Musk or not, or respect him or whatever, it doesn't matter. He has an infinite game mindset. He decided to take his patents, which he certainly has patents. It's not like he didn't file for them or anything. It's just that he said, well, I'm going to make them available to any competitors who want to use them, quote unquote, in good faith. I'm not sure what that means exactly, but to develop electric vehicles. He wants to promote the cause of building electric vehicles because he thinks that's the future. He's positioned his competitors as partners instead of rivals. How cool is that? Now, you may not think it's very smart. From an infinite game standpoint, it's very smart. He's using his rivals as partners and letting them use his patents. Now, I'm sure whatever good faith means, he's going to come down on somebody if they violate whatever he considers good faith be. But at any rate, that's what he did. So everybody can get those patents. And there's not just a couple of them. Look at that. 115, 41, 26. There's a lot. So how are you doing at competing with yourself? Now, the typical viewpoint that you see in companies that I've certainly seen throughout my career, we have a department called product management. Now we lovingly called them product manglement. But the trouble with product management, the idea is that that means you know there are going to be problems with it. And you're just going to deal with the problems. Now, the trouble is that's a little bit inefficient and ineffective because the root problems are probably never addressed. All they're concerned with is fixing whatever the problem is. And they're not looking at product management doesn't have a say in how the products are built. Is that who they talk to? But why not start having, instead of product management, why not call it product excellence department? Your job is to help the product be excellent. That means a little bit more than just managing it. Marketing excellence, sales support excellence specialist. Why not use those kinds of terms? The idea of continuous learning is not optional in the infinite game. Again, and it was a popular thing in the professional audio industry, which I was in for a number of years. And the idea in the recording studio was, we'll fix it in the mix. We'll fix it on the back end. Don't worry. You're a little off key. That's all right. We'll fix it in the mix. And I always hear Dr. Phil saying in the back of my mind, how's that working out for you? Because if you break a mirror, you ever broken a mirror? Ever tried to glue it back together? It'll always have a crack in it. It'll never be the same. You can't fix it once it's broken. The point is to avoid problems, pursue excellence. If you have that attitude, you can then pursue a process of excellence, and you have to have both. If you have problems, we have to ask why. What does Six Sigma say? The 5 whys, right? Fix the right problem. You have to find the root cause. And you have to be aware of fragmentation. A lot of people want to tear the thing apart. They've got a process that's got a lot of steps, and they want to fragment it and think, oh, well, I'm going to fix this problem. Wow, we're going to be so much better. And my answer is, does it matter how fast you can deliver a pizza? If it still tastes like the box you sent it out in, that's not going to help you much. So you need to measure what really matters. KPIs. Ken, I know this is a favorite topic of yours for some reason. Maybe it's a favorite topic of all of you. What's the purpose behind your KPIs? Does it matter how many shipments went out the door? Let me give you an example. What if you got a shipping department that says, wow, we got a 98% shipping rate. These last 6 months, we shipped out 98% of everything that was supposed to go out on time. Yeah. What about the 2%? What did that cost you? How much business was that worth? What if one month was worth $10 million in revenue, that 2%? Oh, but the shipping department, they stand on that 98%. They look great. Malarkey. You need to measure improvement. But you can't even just say improvement. You need to measure something tangible. So this book, Measure That What Matters by John Doerr. There's a lot of examples for OKRs. I'm not going to try to go through them here, but there's a good site, okrexamples.co. You can find a lot of that about OKRs. They're a little bit different than KPIs. What do your KPIs tell you? Certainly you need metrics, just like I already spelled out. But do those metrics support your purpose? Are they only looking at short-term gains? Can you see a cause being advanced by your KPIs? And again, there's another talk by Simon Sinek on YouTube. Just Google Simon Sinek momentum. Here's a slide about KPRs. The thing about KPRs is they actually let you focus on your aspirational goals. You set objectives with measurable results. They're different than KPIs. I don't have the time to go into those here. And frankly, I'm not an expert on OKRs, but I do know that they work really well. Ask Google, LinkedIn, Twitter, they all live by OKRs. They're pretty successful companies, I think. So there must be something to it. Okay, rule number 4. This rule is about the ability and willingness to change. Simon Sinek calls it existential flexibility. The dinosaurs didn't have existential flexibility. They're not around anymore. Same thing could happen to you if you play by the wrong set of rules. You need to be prepared to change everything. Why do I have a picture of a very old mouse on this? You can recognize it as a mouse. It's from the 1960s. It's the one that was created over at the park. And it was one of the first things that Steve Jobs heard about, this new idea of using a mouse and using menus where you could click on things on the screen and get to different things. And there were folders and files and all that kind of organization. Jobs went and saw that, and he came back to Apple, and he told them, scrap everything we're doing. This is what we're going to do now. His people told him he was crazy, that they were going to lose tens of millions of dollars if they did that. And he said, we're going to lose even more than that if we don't do this now, because somebody else is going to do it and they will bury us. And the rest is history. That's how the Macintosh came about. Oh yeah, thanks, Lanny. My friend Lanny put in the chat box. Yeah, that was the Palo Alto Research Center for Xerox. That's where that came from. That's what Jobs went to see. I experienced something like this when I was working for Sony Professional Audio Division a long time ago, because we were losing market share. And what I did was I told the sales team they needed to stop selling into the normal marketplace they were selling, and we needed to go to a different segment of the market. We tripled our sales in months, and we took back the marketplace. Long story can go with that about why that was so successful. But the important thing is you need to be ready to change. And really, that's only part of the problem. You have to know what to change to. What are you going to change, and what are you going to change it to? Is the change you're suggesting necessary, and is it sufficient to execute the change? Let's talk about the financial changes that were made as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. I think you all have experienced some of this, right? Financial performance targets, cash flow projections, operational plans, those certainly changed a lot. How did they affect your company? Increased supply costs, supply chain problems, rising labor costs, different labor costs, operational demands, balance sheet implications, payment disruptions from the companies that you were buying from, but you couldn't, they couldn't deliver, or even maybe you couldn't pay them as well as fast as you used to. What are you doing? How are you thinking about those things? And are they going to continue? Because you may need to execute a lot of changes coming up shortly. What about working remotely? And we talked to some of you before we started, and some of you are working full-time back in the office, and you're trying to negotiate being able to work from home some. Well, even all those things. And there's going to have to be something that changes, especially if you work on things that are proprietary. What about your work at home platform? Encryption, multi-factor authentication. What about securing your work environment at home? Cybersecurity, VPNs, all this stuff is, and it keeps changing as well. So just because you've got it handled today doesn't mean you're going to have it handled as well next month. You better be ready to change. You might need to change how you approach problems. Are you ignoring the elephant in the room? Is there one in your room? Can you see it? Or are you only trying to solve portions of it? I already talked to you a little bit about fragmentation. You know what the trouble with fragmentation is? If you cut an elephant in two, you don't get two smaller elephants, okay? That's just not how it works. That's not how problems come up and live. Let's talk about the most important thing in any process: throughput. All processes have input, process, and output. What's the most important picture? What's the most important bubble on the screen? It's that blue one, the output of whatever this system is. But look at it, it's got multiple processes that affect other processes. Now, which process, if you were going to change one of these processes, which one is most likely to affect throughput the most? You don't have the money to fix all of them. You don't have the manpower or the willpower to fix all of them. Which one would you pick that would most affect throughput? Okay. Remember, I said you got to be aware of fragmentation. Doesn't mean you can't fragment, just means that you need to understand what's going on. Now, most plans I hear for improving various operations include different work on different parts of the system. But what they typically ignore is the bottleneck that is in their system. Where's the weakest link in the chain? Especially you want to find the one that affects everything else. Well, in this case, process 66 is the one that affects everything else. Now, I just kind of made this up. For hospitals, this is very easy for me to identify. It's about physician documentation. But in this case, what about your job requirements? If you run a job shop, that's very important. By job shop, I mean everything you do is custom. So you better make sure you get all of the requirements documented to begin with, or you're going to be in trouble at many places along the line. So you want to focus on one thing, focus on that one first, and it will improve everything else. Okay, rule number 5. This last rule is about willpower and an attitude that doesn't quit. This is a picture of what's his name? All of a sudden, I can't think of his name. It's because I'm doing a presentation, so I can't think of it.
Shackleton.
Yeah. The thing about him was he quit. Now, I learned this through my father. My father was a prisoner of war in a German prisoner of war camp for over 2 years. It's called Stalag 17. You may have seen a movie about that place. When he got captured, he got shot down over France. He was flying in B-17s. When he got shot down, he then got captured and he was able to escape from the camp. He said it was easy to escape. It was hard to get away. He kept getting caught. And the last time he got caught between in the no man's land. He was supposed to be shot at the moment, but the guard's gun jammed, so he survived. He told my mother about that through a letter, and she convinced him to stay put. Just stay there. Don't quit. Show up every day. Stay alive. Don't quit. You'll come home. I learned don't quit from my father. You have to keep playing. That's what you have to do if you're going to play in an infinite game. No one can win in the infinite game, even though there are finite games within it, and you can win those. We've already talked about that. But you should never think that you've won when you won those finite games. But you can, to keep playing, pursue 2 goals. You want to preserve your will to play and the resources to keep playing. That's the main thing. The other thing you can do is learn to frustrate your opponents so that you can make them waste their will to keep playing and their resources, so they will drop out of the game and you will have more chances to be winning. Remember, you're trying to keep trust, cooperation, and innovation. So you want to focus on your team, and then most often all those things will translate in this way to your vendors, your clients, your customers, and your employees. Okay, so how do you frustrate another infinite player? I already said you can do that. Well, I've got some examples of how that. Now, if you'll forgive me, this example is a healthcare example, but I think you'll get the idea. If you have an aggressive player, you want to frustrate them. That's the way you want them to look, not you. Okay, you want them to be frustrated and pull their hair out. Anyway, the example that I'm talking about here comes from Simon Sinek's book called The Infinite Game. And he talks about a small town police department. They were told by the neighborhood that there were drugs being sold out of a house. Of course, that's unacceptable. No, we can't have drugs sold in the neighborhood. You need to get rid of them. Well, what's the typical police response to that? You gather your SWAT team or whatever, and you go storm the house, you clean it out, you arrest everybody there. What's the trouble with that solution? It's dangerous, okay? Your people could be in danger. They certainly will be in danger if you're going into a house full of drug dealers, okay? So, but this small town chief had a different idea. He sent somebody in their blues to just walk up to the door. They knocked on the door, stood back, and when they answered the door, the policeman told them, hey, look, we know you're selling drugs out of this house. And so we're going to be watching the house. We're not going to tell you when. It's going to be unannounced. We'll do it at random times, but we will watch every day. So have a good day. Goodbye. And the guy left. And what happened was they would then have their cruisers park there every day or nearby or drive by or take their lunch there or something like that. So what was the result? The drug dealers had to move out because they couldn't do business there with the police there all the time. So they moved out of the house, left the neighborhood. Okay. So what's the point here? Can you use this kind of a strategy by your company to frustrate the other aggressive players in a similar manner? You're probably not competing with drug dealers. But let me tell you about perhaps the best example I've seen in my work with hospitals. It's about a hospital that was having trouble with an insurance company that kept using rather stupid reasons for not paying for a certain type of case. They were sepsis infection cases. Now, in case you don't know about sepsis, it's like the third leading killer in the world. When sepsis strikes, it can be fatal. And there's some estimates that suggest it contributes to 1/3 to 1/2 of all in-hospital deaths. It is not something to mess around with. Well, a friend of mine, her name is Dr. Maria Johar. She is a physician advisor. Physician advisor is somebody, she doesn't practice clinically now. She stands with one foot in the regulatory side and one foot in the clinical side. She advises the hospital about how to deal with problems in their billing. And so, but there are several stories I could tell about her and how she's done this. But she was getting denials. They were appearing as what's called clinical validation denials. It meant that the payer was coming back 6 months after they already paid for a claim, coming back 6 months later, taking all the money back and saying, well, we don't think it was sepsis. So her question was, well, how do we fight these? And the typical thing that hospitals would do, they would go have what they call a peer-to-peer or a P2P, where they have their physician talk to the insurance company's physician and try to talk them out of the denial and to go ahead and pay them. And they could then try, if that didn't work, they could write an appeal. But appeals these days in that industry take anywhere from 3 to 6 years. So the money's out there and it's gone. Her idea was, nope, I'm not going to do that. She went and talked to all of her departments that had anything to do with those claims. And she educated all of them in how to do the best thing they can in order to avoid these kinds of denials. So the payer wouldn't have an excuse anymore. By payer, I mean the insurance company. They're comically called payers. They don't like to pay. Anyway, they got other auditors and reviewers to look at it, and they all approved of what they were doing. And so she went to the insurance company that was giving them all the clinical validation denials and showed them what they were doing. And she was basically saying, look, you can keep sending us these stupid denials, but we're going to fight you on everyone and we're going to win because this is how good we are. Well, guess what happened? They accepted, they reversed those denials. They accepted her arguments and they stopped sending them stupid denials anymore. So does that mean Dr. Johar was the winner? No, just because she had a successful strategy. Well, she was certainly winning at that time, but remember, it's an infinite game. Now, as long as that other infinite player knows that you've got a good process to defeat them and frustrate them, well, okay, you can see significant results because it costs them money to come after you or to not do it or to fight you, okay? But if you're going to fight that other player, remember it's infinite. They're still going to test you once in a while, okay? And the caveat is despite that process that she installed after she left that hospital, the process reverted to their old habits and their denials came back. If you're going to do battle with that other player, you have to do, that's one of my favorite quotes by Edward Deming. In God we trust, all others must bring data. Get your data, make sure you've got it, keep it up in front of everybody, and make sure that there's somebody else that's going to keep doing things that same way as you go on.
Right.
That,
get that. Could you try again?
sorry, Siri's talking to me for some reason.
It's all good.
Okay. I know you have questions because I've done this talk enough. There is going to be time for a Q&A at the end of this, but I've done this talk enough times to know that there's some fairly common questions. So let's deal with your questions because I'm sure you have some. You've probably not heard people talk about this before. And I'm going to give you some of my answers to common questions because you're probably skeptical, right? So, okay. The most common question I get is, how do I convince my boss to change the way they play? Well, he or she is not likely to listen to you about this. Think about how different this sounds to you just today. They may listen to you, they may not, depends on your relationship. Don't count on it, but you could look for a boss who knows how to play the game the right way and understands. They do exist, but you may have to look around for them. At any rate, what about you? What if you don't have a title or authority to make changes? What I've been talking about, it seems like a lot of work, a lot of change, right? Well, a title may give you authority and even lots of authority, but it doesn't make you a leader. You can choose to be a leader even if you don't have a title or authority. You can choose to teach the others around you the same kind of rules, the same reason you follow these rules. You can play by a new set of rules. What are the values that you have that you use to make decisions? Now, I realize that sometimes you're going to have bosses that won't agree with you about, the decisions you make, but what kind of values do you use to make decisions? You could even go so far as to write down a creed of things that you will strive for, and it will remind you of why you do that. Why do you want a set of core values? Why have a creed? What do those things look like? Because they will help you make change happen. Now, I'll show you an example of a creed here a little bit later, although that creed was written for hospitals, but you'll get the idea. How do you make change happen? Well, this is one of the well-recognized writers about leading change in business organizations. And if you look at these suggestions he has here, that's a lot of the same stuff I've been talking about. Urgency, have a coalition, get commitment. You got to get buy-in. You got to articulate your vision. You've got to sell your vision within your organization with a well-crafted vision statement. I think it actually goes well beyond that. And I'll talk about that in a moment. You've got to remove roadblocks and barriers to change. Now, how do you do that? Everyone resists. We know that people resist change, right? Everybody knows it. Well, I've got an answer for about that. I'm going to show that to you in a moment. And as I said, this stuff all looks like it's a lot of work, and it is, but I have something on the next slide that's going to help you. It'll help you with some of this, and it's free for you here today. All you have to do is click on a link to download it. It's an ebook that I wrote called How to Make Resistance to Change Your New Best Friend. 5 steps to get skeptics and naysayers to join your team. I learned this from several giants like Dr. Eliyahu Goldratt, the guy who wrote Spin Selling, and some other books that I'll show you links to them later on. The problem with getting people to change is there's a process involved in how you get them to agree to go along with you. You got to get them to agree that there is a problem. Doesn't matter how good your solution is. If they don't think there's a problem there, why would they accept your solution? So you got to get them to agree to that. Then you got to get them to talk about what would a solution look like. Not present your solution yet, just what would a solution have to do? Now you present your solution. You get an agreement that your solution would actually work and it doesn't cause other problems and that it can actually be done in your organization. You can get my ebook for a good description and a detailed plan on how to accomplish all that. You get it at that link on the screen. Let's see. Oh, it won't let me copy it out of the notes. Okay, well, I've got another slide with it later, and I'll share the links in the chat box later on. But get that. I'm not even asking for your email. You can directly download it. Contact me afterwards if you want to. Why should you think about your values? Because you need to inspire people, aspiring people. That's what marketing does, okay? It inspires to manipulate prospects like you and me, okay? Fear is a big way to aspire people to do something, right? I should know, I'm a marketer. You can get people to join a gym by aspiring them to be in shape and to look like the people on the right side of that image instead of the left. But to get them to go to the gym and keep going, that takes inspiration. Loyalty is only built by inspiration. So thinking about your values will inspire you. What's your purpose? What's your cause? What are your goals? If people are all in for a cause, they'll go all in on supporting it, moving towards making progress, not just doing a job. Now, let me tell you a creed and how you need to write down a creed and remind yourself of what you do and why you do it. That's what the purpose of a creed is. Now, as I mentioned, what you're seeing here on the screen is because it's a picture of a creed that I wrote for hospitals. For people who work in a hospital, they're called revenue cycle professionals or CDI specialists. But the concept of this came from a book written by a US Navy submarine captain. I'll show you that book in a moment. It's called Turn the Ship Around. A creed will connect you to your everyday endeavors and to whatever it is you aspire to. What inspires you? What kind of just cause inspires you and causes you to get up and go to work in the morning, okay? When people think of what they are doing and why, they'll do almost anything to support the mission of their work. Now consider the stark contrast to an attitude like this versus when people just come to work to get a paycheck with the simple hope of not making a mistake, not getting laid off. Is that really how you want your people to feel? It's not how I want people to feel. What are your personal and professional vision? Here's that book, Turn the Ship Around by David Marquette. And these are the kind of questions that you want to consider. Are you people trying to pursue excellence, or are they just trying to avoid mistakes? Has your organization become, they don't want to do anything new because that's going to probably result in errors. What do we say about how you should view errors? Have you let your error reduction program sap the lifeblood out of anybody wanting to take initiative or take a risk? You spend more time criticizing errors than in celebrating success. When's the last time you gave somebody an attaboy? Look, you read this book, you'll see this captain, he did attaboys almost every day. Anybody who did something that supported the values and the creed that they had, he would make sure and call them out. Why? because it inspired people. Are you able to identify the symptoms of avoiding errors in your workplace? Avoiding them? Are they just avoiding them, or are they trying to be excellent? Why not focus on being excellent? Why don't people see their jobs as doing something excellent rather than not making mistakes? Nobody gets up in the morning and says, I'm going to go to work and do a bad job. But there's a lot of people who get up in the morning and think, I'm going to go to work and I hope I don't get fired. I don't like that idea. Is that how you want to inspire people? You can begin to promote excellence at your company by having values and a creed, okay? Like, answer these questions. Why do you get out of bed in the morning? Why does your department even exist? Why does your job even exist? And why should anyone even care? Now, you want to get the books that I'm going to talk about here. I highly recommend Audible, Kindle, TED.com, 12men.com, readitforme.com, things like that. Those are great examples of where you can get these books and absorb them. Here is a slide where it has, when you get the slides, all these links are there, and you can get them in the deck. And Ken told me that the deck is going to be posted. Last quote I have for you is this one from Vincent van Gogh. If you hear a voice within you say you cannot paint, by all means paint, and that voice will be silent. I actually have a pet name for that voice in my head. I call her Mrs. Vader. So that's all I've got, gang. Thank you for listening. And I'm going to go look up some of the links, and I'll put them in the chat room here.
Oh, that
Ken,
was
back to
great,
you.
Ernie. That was great. A+, man. That was great. I loved it. By the way, for the people listening in, I did put a couple of links that you need to copy before you leave the Zoom meeting, because when we close out the Zoom meeting, you'll lose the links. So in there, I put a survey so we can get your thoughts on tonight and what you want to see for the future. And then the second thing is there's another link for a certificate. So some of you guys need certificates for recertifying or certifying, to show you spent the hour educationally. Certificates there, all set to download. Just copy those links now before you disappear. They're in the chat window.
Oops, I apologize. I put in a link that Ashley asked for your email. Let me put in the one where you can just download the book directly. You don't have to go through my.
Love it. Does any of the attendees have any questions for Ernie while we have Ernie?
I'll just jump in for a second, but I think almost all the books you listed. I know up in Massachusetts, we have a library card called Libby and another one called Hoopla. They're all available for free, and also audiobooks through the Massachusetts library system. So if anybody's looking to get a hold of any of those books.
Very good. That's good to hear, John. I encourage everybody to do that.
Yeah, audiobooks are great for commuting.
I love it. I love it.
I probably answered the big questions.
I know, that's great. I know. So does anyone else listening in have any questions for Ernie? I guess not. So thank you all. So we're going to stay on the line for a while, just in case anyone wants to network, chat, has any questions just about Apex, or just wants to ask Ernie questions. It's just like an in-person meeting, except you can ask him after the regular meeting's over. I'm going to hit stop recording. So if you're feeling funny about asking while it's recording, I will hit stop recording right now. But thank you everyone for attending. Yeah.